Stop for a moment and think about the last time you felt creatively stuck. That frustrating sensation when the well seems dry and inspiration feels like a distant memory. In my deep study of Carl Jung's work, I've come to understand that this isn't a failure of creativity, but rather a profound invitation from the unconscious mind to engage in psychological work. What Jung discovered through his decades of clinical practice and personal exploration is that psychological work and creative expression aren't just related, they're two sides of the same coin, two languages the soul uses to communicate what needs to be brought into consciousness. I want to share with you today how Jung saw this relationship not as optional, but as essential to our psychological health and wholeness. In my research of Jung's cases and personal writings, I've found that he observed something remarkable about his patients who engaged in creative work. When they hit creative blocks, it wasn't because they lacked talent or technique. It was because their unconscious was trying to communicate something important that they weren't listening to in their waking lives. Jung noticed that psychological material, unprocessed emotions, forgotten memories, aspects of the personality that had been rejected, would often manifest first as creative difficulties before appearing as psychological symptoms. Put yourself in this situation I'm about to describe. Imagine you're an artist who suddenly can't paint, or a writer who stares at blank pages, or a musician whose instrument feels foreign in your hands. According to Jung's observations, this isn't creative failure, but psychological material knocking at the door of consciousness, asking to be acknowledged and integrated. What makes Jung's perspective so revolutionary in my study of his work is how he reframed creative blocks not as problems to be solved, but as opportunities for psychological growth. Jung discovered that the unconscious mind speaks primarily through images, symbols, and patterns, the very language of creative expression. When we engage in psychological work through methods like active imagination, dream analysis, or shadow work, we're essentially learning the native language of our deeper self. And when we engage in creative expression, we're giving that deeper self a voice in the outer world. I've seen in countless case studies how Jung helped patients understand that their creative struggles were actually their psyche's way of demanding attention to unresolved psychological material. Take a deep breath and consider this. Your creative dry spells might actually be your soul's way of telling you that there's inner work waiting to be done. Jung developed specific methods to bridge this gap between psychological work and creative expression, approaches I've found incredibly valuable in understanding human psychology. His technique of active imagination, for instance, was essentially a structured way to have a conversation between the conscious mind and the unconscious using creative expression as the medium. Patients would engage with images from dreams or spontaneous fantasies through drawing, writing, or movement, allowing the unconscious to express itself creatively while the conscious mind listened and responded. What's fascinating in my research is how Jung noticed that when people engaged in this process, not only did their psychological symptoms often improve, but their creative blocks would frequently dissolve as well. The energy that was trapped in unconscious conflicts became available for creative expression once those conflicts were brought to light and worked through consciously. The practical application of Jung's insights, based on my extensive study of his methods, involves recognizing that our creative expression and psychological work nourish each other in a continuous cycle. When we avoid psychological work, when we refuse to look at our shadow aspects, when we ignore our dreams, when we suppress difficult emotions, we're essentially clogging the channels through which creative inspiration flows. Conversely, when we engage deeply with creative expression, we're often accessing and giving form to psychological material that hasn't yet reached full consciousness. I encourage you to try this simple Jungian practice. The next time you feel creatively blocked, instead of pushing harder or giving up, ask yourself what psychological material might be asking for attention. What emotion are you avoiding? What aspect of yourself have you been neglecting? What conversation have you been putting off? Often, the very act of turning inward to do this psychological work will unlock the creative flow that seemed blocked. Jung's essential wisdom that I want to leave you with today is this profound truth. Creativity isn't something we do, it's something that moves through us when we're in right relationship with our whole self, both conscious and unconscious. The relationship between psychological work and creative expression is one of mutual necessity. Psychological work gives creativity its depth and authenticity, while creative expression gives psychological work its voice and form in the world. This understanding can fundamentally transform how you approach both your inner work and your creative life, seeing them not as separate endeavors, but as complementary aspects of the same journey toward wholeness. Now, if this relationship between psychological blocks and creative expression intrigues you, you're going to find tomorrow's exploration absolutely essential, where we'll dive deep into Jung's specific insights about how creative blocks reveal psychological material. Jung had remarkable case studies showing exactly how creative stagnation points directly to unconscious content waiting to be integrated. And understanding this specific dynamic could revolutionize how you approach both your creative dry spells and your psychological growth. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because tomorrow's discussion builds directly on what we've explored today and represents the next crucial step in applying Jung's wisdom to your creative and psychological life. I'm genuinely excited to share with you how Jung's methods can help you decode what your creative blocks are really trying to tell you about your unconscious world.